afternoon, everybody. Could we remain standing while we hear prayers from Father Alan Bradford? Thank you.
Our prayers are based around wisdom. A short reflection before we pray from the book of James. Who is wise and understanding among you? Let them show it by their good life, by deeds done in humility that comes from wisdom. The wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure, then peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere. Peacemakers who sow in peace reap a harvest of righteousness. And so we pray. Heavenly Father, we pray for our Queen. We see so much wisdom there. We see humility, and we see how considerate and sincere she is, and the fruit of her reign. We pray for strength and healing for her as she rests through being unwell with COVID. Bring your healing, Lord. Dear God, we pray for our world, aware that we've been through so much as a planet in recent times, with the pandemic, with storms, disasters, and the wars that have continued. We are saddened and concerned, very much more so this very day, that the world has become more unstable, with Russia now advancing upon the Ukraine. We pray for peace. Our heart goes out to the people of Ukraine. We pray for wisdom for world and international leaders at this time, as many meetings and discussions take place about the world's response to Russia's actions. We pray for wisdom in deciding and acting upon sanctions, and especially for deciding upon actions and diplomacy going forward. We pray for wisdom for those who exercise national and local leadership, for the Prime Minister, Cabinet, and Parliament. We thank you for the work and gift of our Mayor and Mayoress, for our Deputy Mayor and Deputy Mayoress, for the councillors of this borough, and for all those employed by the council. Almighty God, you have called us to serve you in the privilege of the roles that we have and hold. For this meeting this evening and beyond, we offer afresh tonight the gifts, characters, and personalities you have given each one of us here tonight, and those who can't be with us. We offer ourselves intentionally and humbly to serving you for the good of the people of Hillingdon and beyond. Give us wisdom as we face the opportunities and challenges ahead. Give us wisdom and energy and vision. May we inspire one another. May our discussions, our thoughts, and what we open our mouths to say tonight be seasoned with wisdom, for the honour of your name, Almighty God. Amen.
Thank you. Could everybody be seated? We now move on to... hurry up. Apologies for absence.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have apologies from Councillors Chapman, Davies, Duncan, Graham, Lakmana, Morse, Radia, Sansapuri, Seaman Digby and Stead.
Thank you. Do we have any declarations of interest? No? Yep. Oh, we have 2 sets of minutes to agree on. Have we all agree on that? Thank you. Right, we move on to agenda item 4 rapidly. It's my announcements. Well, I'm into my 10th month of the mayorship, and it continues to be enlightening and extremely rewarding. I am really amazed at the public generosity and the spirits of the residents of Hillingdon. And is it any wonder, in my opinion, we are still the best borough in London, the UK, or even the universe, I think. Some of the highlights that myself and the Mayor has performed, opening new children's playgrounds across the borough. again, a wonderful way to celebrate all our green spaces, over 200 parks, and we know about how many green flags we have. Fantastic. The citizen ceremonies, which are now taking place every week. It really is a joy to see people who are now becoming British citizens and how proud they are. One of our newest citizens actually made a plaque for us, and you can see it later on in the parlour, which was a fantastic gift. Something very close to my heart, increasing footfall in high streets. Our officers were tasked with an initiative, and it was very well received. Kids going around looking for clues. And it was great to see. And I met Mr. Gruffalo, apparently, and my grandson is extremely sad that he wasn't there to meet him. It's a lovely chap. This afternoon, myself and the leader, we had a wonderful opportunity to award the Civic Medal to Mr. Bob Beeston. He's the third person, can't say that word yet, third person to receive this award. This was started in 2011, and get this, he's been part of the Scouts for 80 years. And when he walked in, both me and the leader, I think we agreed on this, he looked so young, he was so fit, and it's put me to shame. I unfortunately hurt myself, and I had to go to A&E in Hillingdon Hospital, and I take my hat off to them. Really, really, they looked after me very well. People do knock the NHS, but when you go through the hospital yourself, you realise it's free at port of call, and they look after you well. So I'd like to publicly just to say thank you very much for the staff in A&E. I'm sure this person wouldn't want me to mention it, but I'm going to mention it. They received the Golden Medal for the Polish Armed Forces from the Minister of Defense of Poland, and then from the President of Poland himself, the Knight's Cross of the Order of Merit from the Republic of Poland. This is for exceptional, sustained contribution to the memory of members of the Polish Air Force in the West during World War II. And this is awarded to one of our own, Grandfather Hillingdon, as I like to call him, Sir Ray Puddifoot. And I just want to, I'm going to stand. I'm sure he won't want me to mention it, but I think he deserves it. On a sad note, this is sort of my last meeting which I'll be chairing when we'll be jousting in good spirits, I hope. There are a number of councillors who won't be returning later in May, and I just want to say personally, I won't be naming every of them, because I don't know most of them, but thank you very much for your services. You worked extremely hard, and we hope your replacements will work just as hard. And on a final note, the Mayoress's part of me going on a diet has worked, because I've managed to lose 3 kilos apparently. So well done, Mayoress. Right, we move on to 5. Councillor Edwards.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. And if you will allow me, I'd like to speak off the agenda for just one moment, and that is to say, on behalf of the Chamber, I hope you will all agree with me, to extend our thanks to Perry Scott and his team for the fantastic work they did Friday, clearing up after Storm Eunice. Yeah. I'm going to go a tiny little bit further, because I didn't realise quite how much damage has been done until you get these details through. 320 reports coming into the contact centre for us, 6 teams deployed out there working around the clock, 130 trees to be cleared from our roads and across people's property, 142 housing problems, 49 of them emergencies. We had roofs blown off, tiles blown off, damage caused all over. The way our staff stepped up to the plate has been fantastic. It is what we expect in Hillingdon, but that still deserves our heartfelt thanks on behalf of our residents. So thank you. Now, returning to the agenda, Mr. Mayor, there are 3 items within the report, the head of Democratic Services, and I would take the first item alone because in the past it has risen to debate. Allowances, members' allowances, the Council is required to re-adopt its allowance scheme each year, and in so doing must give due regard to the recommendations made by the independent panel on remuneration of councillors in London. The panel has very recently released its latest report and has recommended increases in both the members' allowance and the leaders' allowance, from which all special responsibility allowances are determined. The panel have also given notice of bringing forward the next report, as they believe more substantive increases may be warranted, but they require further time to properly determine this. The Conservative administration acknowledges the panel's experience and expertise in this matter and will not replace their judgment with its own. I am therefore recommending to Council that the basic members' allowance be increased to £12,014 as recommended by the panel for 2022-23, the cost of which will be greatly exceeded by the savings from the reduced number of councillors from May. The leaders' allowance is recommended to increase to £62,092, an increase of 5.7%. We accept in principle this increase, but now is not the time to implement it, especially as all special responsibility allowances, save that of the leader, will continue to fall within the ranges recommended. Therefore, no changes in the special responsibility allowances are proposed for this year. I move the recommendation at 1 on the order paper.
Is that seconded?
I second and formally reserve my right.
Is that agreed? Councillor Edwards.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, items 2 and 3 I believe are non-contentious and I will move them together. Item 2 is the programme of meetings for the next municipal year, and item 3 is an extension following Councillor Graham's slow recovery from illness, which we wish him well. He is on the mend, but he's not going to be sufficiently well to attend within the 6-month rule. I move those 2 recommendations.
Is that seconded?
And I second and reserve my right.
Thank you. Is that Councillor Curling?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. On behalf of the Labour Group, I would just like to put on record our best wishes to Councillor Graham for a speedy recovery.
Thank you for that. Is that agreed? Agreed. Councillor Flynn.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to move the suspension of Council Procedure Rule 14.4 to allow unlimited speaking time for the mover and the seconder of the budget motion and the principal speaker and seconder of the amendment from the Labour Group.
Is that seconded? Councillor Chamdal.
I second and reserve my right.
Thank you. Councillor Goddard. Oh, sorry, is that agreed? Councillor Goddard.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The environment which we now find ourselves in is fast moving, sometimes taking us into uncharted territory and certainly generating fresh challenges. Currently, the data and trends on COVID-19 are encouraging. Yet even if we have reached a point where we can learn to live routinely with the pandemic, questions must remain as to its legacy and how long we will experience its influence on income and costs. The world's major economies have now all entered a phase of inflation, and there are judgment calls to be made as to the extent and duration of this as a factor when considering the future of our cost base. The crisis in Ukraine, and I fear, sadly, I must now refer to it as a war, has destabilized financial markets and has added further to the pressures on fuel and energy costs. In April, we will see the impact of increased national insurance costs, which of course is a necessary measure in order to support the NHS and the national care infrastructure. This will be felt not only within our own payroll, but also by our outsourcing partners. Interest rates have been increased in the last 2 consecutive quarters, and a further increase is expected next quarter. This will be the first occasion on which we have experienced increases in 3 consecutive quarters for 17 years. Hillingdon's vibrant business community is obviously heavily accented towards the travel sector, and the extensive pandemic support mechanisms provided by central government are now starting to fall away, leaving many businesses establishing themselves with changed patterns of activity and different operating models. This has the potential to have a profound impact, not only on business itself, but also upon the levels of employment within this borough. We must recognise that the foregoing factors have a direct impact on the household finances of our residents. Whilst it is encouraging that the local government settlement is a 3-year one, which gives us certainty, it is also clear that the settlement yields funding that is broadly flat over its term. Mr. Mayor, it is essential that we recognise and act upon the implications of these market forces as they apply to our residents as well as to this council. From a financial perspective for the London Borough of Hillingdon, 21-22 so far has been yet another year of success. In spite of pressures imposed by the growth in demand and escalation of costs for social care services, our own year-to-date performance is showing a positive variance against budget, and we have successfully preserved the greater bulk of our general balances and earmarked reserves. Mr. Mayor, this is a direct reflection of the high quality of our vigilance and our rigorous financial controls, which over the years have characterised Hillingdon's capacity to provide its residents with excellent frontline services at an economically viable and attractive cost. At this point, I would like to place on record my appreciation and thanks to our outstanding team of officers and staff here at Hillingdon, who have navigated us through a challenging year and have maintained the standards of quality and service which our residents are entitled to receive. Mr. Mayor, a number of fundamental principles underpin the processes which this Conservative administration has used when putting together this budget for 2022-23 and the medium-term financial forecast to 2026-27. First and foremost, we recognise the significance of our frontline services and their importance to our residents. Hence, there have not been, and there will not be, any cuts to frontline services. Indeed, our philosophy is that we will provide whatever it takes in resources and funding to ensure that high-quality service is delivered. Secondly, notwithstanding that most important principle, we know that efficiencies can be achieved in the way in which back-office support, administration, and customer communication is delivered. We are committed to identifying and delivering savings by enhancing efficiency and driving out bureaucracy. Many of our plans in this area cannot be achieved within one discrete financial year, and hence we are adopting a longer-term and strategic approach to these savings. Mr. Mayor, as a borough, our fees and charges are amongst the very lowest per capita in London. Our policy is that fees and charges should not be viewed as profit-making, but should cover the costs of providing services to our residents. Where services are used by some residents but not others, then it is right to levy a charge. And that charge should be upon those who use the service, rather than asking all council taxpayers to subsidise the activity. Conversely, where a service is universally used by residents, as a general principle, we will absorb its cost within council tax. However, there are some fees and charges which are designed to penalise breaches of rules. For this category, fees and charges should act as an effective deterrent, and there is therefore no justification for keeping charges low. Hillingdon has always sought to use taxes paid by residents to provide support and develop the delivery of our key services and to maintain and enhance the infrastructure and environment within this borough. It therefore follows that our balances are maintained at modest but adequate levels. The reality is that our balances are there to protect the Council from the adverse impact of unforeseen consequences. There is little doubt that the current economic climate has increased risk factors, and hence we will look to produce balanced budgets without depleting balances, and indeed will look to increase these balances over the medium term. Finally, we are most anxious to promote openness, clarity and transparency in the way in which we provide information about our finances. We are accountable to all of our residents, and we take this accountability very seriously indeed. I have to say that this has not found universal acceptance and favour within certain segments of this chamber, amongst whom it would appear counting the number of pages appears to be of greater significance than reading the content. Mr. Mayor, a consultation budget was prepared and submitted in December 2021. Residents and the Council's select committees have received the opportunity to consider and comment on this. I'm pleased to report that the vast majority of comment received from both sources was favourable and complimentary. However, in the light of the fast-moving financial environment that we find ourselves in, we have chosen to make a number of changes to the General Fund revenue and capital budgets. These changes will leave us with a balanced budget for 22-23 and a comparatively small budget gap of £5.7 million over the 5-year term of the new MTFF. I will deal here with the more material elements of those changes as they affect the 2023 budget. A greater provision for inflationary factors will increase costs by £672,000. Increased interest rates plus increased capital funding for Hillingdon First Limited add a projected £298,000. An increase in the collection fund deficit of £406,000 is driven by a slower rate in the reduction in use of the council tax reduction scheme. However, heading in the opposite direction is some good news in terms of the finalisation of the local government finance settlement, which was included in the consultation budget based on the best indications available at the time. The finalised 3-year settlement improves our position by just over £1.1 million in 22-23 and by £3.3 million over the life of the MTFF. Mr. Mayor, the final material change is in respect of council tax, where a reduced rate of increase derives a cost of £1.1 million. The consultation budget anticipated an increase of 2.8%, this being 1% in respect of the social care precept and 1.8% for core council tax. In the light of the many financial pressures which our residents are facing in terms of increased energy costs, general cost inflation, rising interest rates and national insurance, we believe that it is right to minimise the impact of council tax increases on household budgets. And for that reason, we are proposing to reduce the rate of increase in council tax to 1.9%. This being 1% for the social care precept and a mere 0.9% for core council tax. Mr. Mayor, by contrast, our neighbours, the Labour-controlled London boroughs of Hounslow, Ealing and Harrow, are all proposing to increase council tax by 2.99%, which of course is the maximum increase open to them without conducting a referendum of residents. Therefore, if we consider the current proposals, the total 22-23 council tax bill for a resident in Hillingdon with a Band D property will be £1,658.87, while the equivalent cost in Ealing will be £1,735.48. In Hounslow, it is £1,774.18, and in Harrow, it is an enormous £2,042.09. So, to be absolutely clear about this, a Band D council taxpayer in Hillingdon will be £383.22 or 18.8% better off than a Harrow resident. And that's even before we consider the comparative impact of fees and charges. Consolidated within the annual council tax costs that I've referred to is the London Mayor's Precept, which is a levy on all London Borough residents. For 22-23, Sadiq Khan's Precept will amount to £395.59 and hence represents 23.8% of a Band D resident's total bill. The London Mayor has increased the Precept this year by a staggering 8.8%. And this follows hard on the heels of the 9.5% increase which he imposed for 21-22. Indeed, since Mr Khan assumed office as London Mayor 5 years ago, the Precept has increased by an eye-watering 41.3%. Mr Mayor, if you were ever seeking evidence of the tax and spend profligacy of the Labour Party, you have it here. Firstly, in the behaviour of our neighbouring London boroughs, who it would appear have little choice but to chase the maximum council tax increase open to them, and in the chaos at the Greater London Authority provided over by Sadiq Khan as he seeks to plug the gaping holes in the finances for policing and for Transport for London, who, by the way, have also just announced the largest increases in fares on record. Let us return to the sanity and control which Hillingdon Conservatives have achieved over the years. Over a period of 10 years, up to 2018-19, this Conservative administration operated a freeze in council tax, whilst at the same time preserving, and in many instances enhancing frontline services. Today, that freeze is worth a saving of £4,490.79 to a Band D council taxpayer who lived in Hillingdon throughout that 10-year period and continues to live here today. Over the period from April 2008 to December 2021, the Consumer Price Index, the generally accepted measure of inflation these days, has increased by 34%. Over the same period, the population of this borough has increased from 262,500 to 309,000. That's an increase of 17.7%, and the number of households has increased from 109,400 to 114,400, which is an increase of 13.9%. By contrast, under Hillingdon Conservatives, council tax has increased by a mere 13%. Mr Mayor, at current rates of interest, the Labour Mayor of London, would consume that increase in just 18 months. Furthermore, the introduction of the older people's discount has yielded a saving for a Band D household of £5,504.89 for any resident over the age of 65 who has participated in the scheme since its inception. In summary, Mr Mayor, by the time households within bands A to D receive the energy bills rebate of £150, no one in these bands will suffer an increase in council tax. Indeed, they will receive reduced bills to those received last year. However, none of the credit for that, surely, can be attributed to the Mayor of London. This Conservative administration is committed to a policy of strategic and longer-term planning. And as you've already heard, this is already having a beneficial impact in materially reducing our budget gap, the difference between our projected income and costs, in the later years of our 5-year forecast. Turning to our sources of income in the General Fund, council tax income, even with the reduced rate of increase, will generate a further £4.6 million for us in 22-23. £2.4 million will be derived from the modest increase in council tax, whilst the remaining £2.2 million will accrue from the continued growth in our tax base, i.e. the growing number of households in the borough. The small growth in our business rates income of £1.5 million is derived from the recovery of businesses post-pandemic and the expansion of our tax base, albeit that the longer-term outlook on this source does not suggest material growth. The long-awaited central government review of business rates, and in particular the retention rate for local authorities, may well influence this longer-term view. The local government settlement by central government in 2022 is for 3 years, and this is helpful as it assists longer-term planning. Grant income will increase in 22-23 by £8.3 million and will run broadly flat for the remainder of the settlement term. However, and this is an important point to appreciate, government funding for COVID pressures, and these have amounted to £52 million over the last 3 fiscal years, will cease with effect from the 1st of April 2022. In the course of preparing this budget and the MTFF, we have carried out an extensive review of our fees and charges, applying the core principles that I've already referred to. Let me remind you that we look to cover our costs from users on services which are used by some, but not all residents. Universally used services we finance from council tax. We will ensure that fees and charges penalise the breaking of rules and are an effective deterrent. And finally, we will not seek to make a profit out of the provision of services which are subject to fees and charges. In 22-23, the implementation of this review...
Sorry, Councillor Goddard. Can I just remind everybody, if you are, especially in a public gallery, yeah, can we switch off your phones, please? That's not the question I asked. And, please respect the chair when I'm making a decision, yeah? Keep your comments for everything else, but not for this. Thank you. Sorry, Councillor Goddard.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will resume. In 22-23, the implementation of this review will yield an additional £3 million in fees and charges income. Yet by the end of the 5-year period of the medium-term financial forecast, the annual increase over 21-22 levels will have increased to £8.2 million. Mr. Mayor, data compiled for 2019-20 shows that amongst the London boroughs, Hillingdon had the second lowest fees and charges per resident out of the 33 boroughs, for £108.61 per resident. By contrast, Harrow charged £181.35, Hounslow £199 and threepence, Ealing £214 and 2 pence. My back of an envelope calculation convinces me that the increases contemplated in this budget are highly unlikely to change our overall position in the league table. Once again, this is an illustration that Hillingdon is providing great value to its residents. Yeah. In aggregate, costs in the general fund for 22-23 are projected to amount to £251 million. This represents an overall increase of £12.8 million from that incurred in the current 21-22 financial year. And the MTFF indicates that these costs will further grow to £280 million by 26-27. As I've already stated, our policy is that we will continue to provide whatever it takes to maintain the comprehensiveness and quality of our frontline services. This will take the inevitable form of growth in our population and the specific growth in the range and demand for our services and support. It is notable that this factor of demand-led growth has been significant, contributing £13.5 million in increased costs in 22-23 and £26.4 million across the life of our medium-term financial forecast. Mr. Mayor, this is a significant demonstration of this Conservative group's commitment to investment in our frontline services, and is worthy of note that in 22-23 we are investing £9.8 million of this into adult social care, support for looked after children, and in special educational needs transportation, all of which are critical social care needs amongst our resident population. It is now recognised that inflation is running at 5.5% in the United Kingdom, and the effect of this has been built into this budget and MTFF. Particularly influential factors are staff pay settlements, which were partially sheltered by the use of earmarked reserves in 21-22, but for which the full effect is experienced in 22-23. To this needs to be added the impact of the increase in national insurance contributions which take place with effect from April 22. A further major factor is the dramatic escalation in energy costs. Inflation factors have driven our cost base up by £12 million in 22-23, and the 5-year outlook identifies a further £27.5 million in the subsequent 4 years. The Bank of England's view is that inflation is at a temporary peak, and that we can expect to see a return to its targeted level of 2% in 23-24. Mr. Mayor, I think that remains to be assessed and evaluated. Within our financing and corporate budgets, the largest influence for change is in respect of our debt service costs, which are projected to increase as a result of the 2 upward adjustments in interest rates recently made by the Bank of England's Monetary Policy Committee and the change in the level of debt required to finance part of our capital programme. This generates an increase in debt service costs of £1.9 million in 22-23 and £7.3 million by 26-27. Our savings programme will generate a reduction in costs of £10.6 million in 22-23, with a further £19 million identified in the 4 following years of the medium-term financial forecast. A number of key initiatives underpin this programme. The use of digital technology to transform contact and communication with our customers, the residents of this borough, combined with the introduction of robotics to streamline and simplify back-office processes. In excess of £1 million will be derived from this process in 22-23 alone. We have already achieved annual savings amounting to £1 million per annum from a restructuring of senior management positions. And further work will continue to realign portfolios and to cascade staffing efficiencies down into the intermediate management positions. We are using business process re-engineering techniques in order to redesign, simplify and enhance service delivery models. We will be deploying greater use of zero-based budgeting techniques to further redefine core costs. We are progressively moving our procurement process away from being a compliance obligation to becoming an effective weapon in driving out excess or unnecessary cost. We are developing asset strategies that maximise the potential for optimising their use, wherever possible, their commercialisation, whether this be by letting excess space in council buildings or by developing new build assets with multiple applications. Mr. Mayor, this Conservative administration has extensive experience of both public and private sectors, and this helps us to challenge the public sector norms of behaviour, introducing management techniques which are proven in the private sector. I repeat, none of our savings programmes will give rise to cuts in frontline services, but we know that there is far more to enhancing and maintaining key services than by simply throwing cash at them, as is the Labour way. This authority continues to provide outstanding support and advice to families who need our help, a council tax discount scheme for the over 65s, free weekly refuse, green waste and food collections. These are just a few of the examples of the many advantages which the residents of Hillingdon enjoy. Mr. Mayor, the London Borough of Hillingdon has consistently benefited from excellent financial management and robust controls over the past 20 or so years. This legacy continues and will extend at least into the next 4 years following another Conservative victory at the local elections this coming May. The significance of a stable financial position and strong management is that it enables the Council to invest in frontline services and infrastructure with confidence, a confidence that the consequences of its actions and decisions are beneficial to our residents and measurable and understandable in terms of their impact on our financial position. This Conservative administration believes that council tax received from our residents should be used for 2 and only 2 purposes only. Firstly, to cover the necessary costs of providing and investing in excellent frontline services and infrastructure, and secondly, ensuring that the Council has adequate balances and reserves to meet any unforeseen costs and obligations which may arise from outside and uncontrollable factors. It therefore follows that Hillingdon does not carry the enormous balances and reserves which can be seen on the balance sheets of some authorities. Hillingdon carries a level of balances which are assessed professionally as being appropriate to and consistent with our economic environment and identified risk profiles. At the end of 21-22, in just over a month's time, Hillingdon will hold £57.9 million in general balances and earmarked reserves. This represents a stable platform for our activities and our risk environment as previously assessed. Of the foregoing balances, £26.6 million is in general balances, and this is satisfactorily within the target range set by the Corporate Director of Finance for 21-22. That range being the lower level of £15 million and the upper limit of £35 million. Mr. Mayor, the equivalent review of our balances and reserves policy for 22-23 has reset the lower level of general balances at 20 million and the upper limit at 39 million. These increases are largely attributable to the uncertainties created by the post-COVID environment, inflation, interest rates, and potential risks arising from our supplier contracts. This approach illustrates the prudence and care which characterises all Hillingdon's financial decisions. And as a matter of policy, we will therefore look to set future balanced budgets without resorting to drawing down general balances. Indeed, we will look to build them further as circumstances permit. Mr. Mayor, the opposition has sought to suggest that this authority is on the brink of bankruptcy as a result of the position on the dedicated schools grant. That assertion is wildly inaccurate and can only be characterised as fiction and reckless, desperate electioneering. As members will recall, Councillor O'Brien provided a very clear and comprehensive explanation of the DSG position at a recent meeting of this council. However, let me remind you of the essence of the issue. Hillingdon has properly and fully observed and honoured its statutory obligations in providing tuition and support to children in the borough with special educational needs. The rapid increase in the numbers of children falling into this category and the escalating cost of providing this tuition is a national phenomenon and has exceeded the funding model provided by the Department for Education. So to be absolutely clear, Hillingdon has already paid the costs in question and has in effect been funding the Department for Education. Therefore, there is no abnormal cash outgoing up ahead which might push this authority into bankruptcy. It is further alleged by the opposition that the deficit on the dedicated schools grant, which is projected to arrive at a maximum level of £44 million, is going to be charged to the general fund balances, thus creating a technical insolvency. Mr. Mayor, there is either an ignorance of the law or a total disregard for it on the part of the opposition. Which of these it is, I have no idea. Mr. Mayor, let me therefore educate members of the opposition. Under the provisions of the Schools and Early Years Finance England Regulations 2020, deficit positions on council's dedicated schools grants may not be charged to general fund without the express permission of the Secretary of State. Therefore, even if we wish to charge the deficit to general fund, we would not be permitted to do so. It has been confirmed by the Department of Education that the Secretary of State will not be asked to so direct this.
There goes their kite.
The ring-fencing provisions described above are due to expire on the 31st of March 2023. Assurances have been given that this ring-fencing legislation will be refreshed and renewed. Is this specifically because of Hillingdon, Mr. Mayor? No, it is not. There is a large queue of local authorities right across the country waiting to enter discussions with the DfE on this very subject. So let's be clear, these are not issues unique to Hillingdon. The rest of London faces them too, and then the DfE will turn its attention to the shires. This is a recognised national issue. As a curious contradiction to all of this, the opposition has also alleged that Hillingdon is looking for a bailout from the DfE. This is not so. As I've already explained, a repayment of the deficit is nothing more than the DfE settling its obligations to Hillingdon. Mr. Mayor, I am very pleased to say that Hillingdon has submitted a detailed plan to the DfE, which will resolve the deficit in the medium term and will confirm DfE support for a major capital programme to create additional special educational needs places in the borough. This plan and the financial consequences arising from it are now agreed in principle with senior DfE officials, but are naturally subject to contract and ministerial approval. Members will therefore appreciate that I cannot disclose greater detail at this time. All I can say is that once the agreement has been finalised, It will represent an excellent outcome for Hillingdon and its residents and will resolve this matter once and for all. The deficit position on the dedicated schools grant has not arisen as a consequence of financial mismanagement, and it is a disappointment to reflect that the opposition is promulgating such malicious and irresponsible misinformation. Hillingdon's financial position therefore remains stable and strong, and we can address the future and the challenges which it will bring with complete confidence. The General Fund Capital Programme allocates expenditure of £319 million within the 5 years to 26-27. Major features within this include the following: £35 million for the new Useley and West Drayton Leisure Centre, £35 million for the redevelopment of the Uxbridge Civic Centre, which will generate cost savings, income and capital receipts. £26 million on a replacement outdoor sports and leisure facility, which will replace the HOAC facility, which is displaced by HS2. £15 million of working capital funding for our captive property development business, Hillingdon First Limited, to finance pipeline construction projects. £22 million for improvements to school buildings. £54 million to create additional special educational needs places within the borough. £65 million for the borough's road network and transport infrastructure. And £25 million on initiatives to reduce the borough's carbon footprint. In this context, this administration is leading the Green Initiative in Hillingdon. This represents a firm commitment to maintaining and enhancing the environment which Hillingdon residents enjoy, and will be achieved with an incremental borrowing of only £62 million, which take general fund debt to £252 million, which is comfortably within our borrowing limits and entirely affordable in terms of debt service obligations. Mr. Mayor, I've already touched upon the ring-fenced dedicated schools grant to some extent, but I will now make further comment on the 22-23 budget. The projected in-year deficit for 22-23 is £4.9 million, which represents a substantial reduction in the 21-22 deficit of £12.7 million. The only block which is in deficit is in respect of high needs. The increase in numbers of additional pupils who will receive SEN support in 22-23 adds a further £3.3 million in costs. Incremental DFE funding for this block will amount to £6 million in 22-23. An agreed 0.5% transfer from the schools block will yield a contribution of £1.26 million. However, savings achieved from the remedial measures put in place will amount to £3.8 million. Mr. Mayor, this serves to illustrate not only the major financial impact of the growth in special needs cohort in this borough, but also the benefit of the cost-saving measures already put in place. We expect in-year deficits in the dedicated schools grant will be eliminated no later than 2025. Mr. Mayor, I now turn to our housing revenue account. The housing revenue account is a ring-fenced fund that currently comprises an estate of just over 10,200 council houses. The HRA has a stable capital platform with reserves of £15 million and an operating positive variance against budget of £133,000 in the current financial year to date. The revenue budget for 22-23 will see rents increase by the growth in the consumer price index plus 1% as permitted by law. This generates an increase to rental income of 4.1%, which is £2.7 million in monetary terms. The largest factor in terms of costs is in respect of inflation, which largely influences workforce and energy costs. Inflation adds £1.6 million to operating costs. The revenue account budget yields a balanced budget after a contribution of £19.7 million is made towards our capital programme. Over the MTFF period to 26-27, the Housing Revenue Account Capital Programme amounts to a spend of £450 million. This programme contains three key elements: growth in housing stock by 500 units across the term of the MTFF, the Hayes Regeneration Scheme, which would yield an additional 185 units, and works to establish the quality and improve the quality of existing housing stock. Over the period of the MTFF, borrowings to finance the 450 million will increase by 182 million, with debt levels staying comfortably within accepted levels and debt service costs comfortably assimilated. Mr. Mayor, this is an excellent budget for this authority and for our residents. It is careful and prudent in its approach to the risks that it faces, but it is forward-looking and dynamic when making the right provisions for our residents. It is a budget for investment, investment in our frontline services and investment in our infrastructure. It is a budget in which we can all take great pride. In closing, Mr. Mayor, I want to thank Paul Waymond, our Corporate Director of Finance, and his splendid team for yet another year of excellent work and consistent high achievement. Mr. Mayor, I therefore move recommendations 1 to 15 as set out in section 6 of the Order of Business. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Do we have a seconder for that? Councillor Edwards.
Mr. Mayor, I second and reserve my rights. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mathers.
Point of order, Mr. Mayor, if I may, through you, may you just remind members not to turn their microphones on deliberately whilst other members are speaking? It seems that some members of the opposition are looking to disrupt and sabotage the YouTube link. So I'd be grateful if you could advise members that they should not be doing that during the process of the meeting.
Thank you for that. So can I remind members not to put your microphones on when somebody's speaking, please? Thank you. That's the end of the matter. Councillor Mathers.
Mr. Mayor, I move this amendment to make Hillingdon a better borough. I move this amendment to assure residents of this borough that a Labour-run council in May will do things differently. We will do it better. I move this amendment to make clear to this chamber and Hillingdon residents that a Labour administration will support residents immediately with a council tax freeze to help them with the cost of living crisis caused by the Conservative government and spoken about by our Conservative colleagues. Our amendment shows we are better than the Conservative administration in maintaining and improving Hillingdon's council services without risking the council's finances. Our amendment shows that we will listen to, support and resolve the issues that matter to residents. Our amendment shows we will not allow the deliberate decline of our council services to continue. Our library service shut at lunchtimes, our youth service run to the ground, not to mention the deliberate decline of our children's centres, the deliberate decline of repairs to council properties, the deliberate decline of our antisocial behaviour team, and the deliberate decline of our bin collections, especially to flats. I urge this chamber to support our amendment. Mr. Mayor, I wish to express my sincere thanks to officers who have worked with us on this amendment. I also wish to thank my Labour colleagues for all their energy, insight, assistance in preparing this amendment to the Cabinet's budget. Our officers in this council are outstanding. Our officers have worked extremely hard, as we've heard also with the recent storm. And they reflect the competence and talent that we have in this council, despite the incompetence shown by the Conservative administration, which the Cabinet clearly demonstrated most recently in their inability to provide the final budget papers in a timely manner. The cost of living crisis is impacting us all. Many households are struggling with rising bills in fuel, energy, food prices and other essentials. The Office of National Statistics states the cost of living crisis is being felt by 76% of adults this month. That's 3 in 4 households. Earlier this year, a YouGov poll commissioned by the Food Foundation suggested that 2.4 million children in London, that's 17%, live in food insecure households. And we know in Hillingdon our food banks are very busy. When questioning more details as to the reason why adults claim to be living in food poverty was due to not having enough money, we, Labour, will take proper action immediately to support our residents and not just make political gestures. The immediate cost of living crisis facing residents requires an immediate freeze to Hillingdon's element of council tax at the 21-22 levels. This freeze will be financed in the short term from our reserves which exceed the recently risen required minimum, but by revising the capital programme commitments without putting at risk key investment in the budget, the Labour Group have identified £800,000 in savings of interest payments. Identified savings that prevent cuts from a Conservative administration or a Labour one in May that may be needed to future years. It's worth mentioning at this point, as they have done, that our amendment to this budget is fully costed, and unlike the lack of detail in the Conservative budget, to lower council tax, the Conservatives have just nearly added £1 million in the gap in the council's finances in a year's time, leaving a £5.68 million gap in the council's finances in 5 years. Why do they not tell residents how they will find the money? There was little detail tonight. Can residents expect more cuts from the services from Hillingdon Conservatives in future years? On current forms, when we look at our youth service, yes. But without honest detail from this administration, residents are left to guess. Do the Conservatives even know how they will balance the book in 5 years? The Labour amendment is honest and shows residents how savings can be safely achieved. To pay for changes in our amendment, we are proposing reducing the cost of redeveloping the land around us here at the Civic Centre and the Civic Centre itself. The Conservative budget demands £35 million to rebuild the Civic Centre and housing, when the cost of the project is closer to £25 million. Are they, like Boris Johnson, overspending on wallpaper and conference rooms in the Conservative offices? The extra £10 million of unnecessary borrowing from this project costs Hillingdon taxpayers £500,000 per year, £500,000 per year. That's £500,000 of cuts, £500,000 less to spend on issues that matter, which could be fighting antisocial behaviour in Ruislip, fly tipping and littering in Uxbridge, or halting unnecessary council tax increases. Hillingdon's taxpayers are increasingly paying for the Conservative growing borrowing debt. Excuse me, I'll say that again because I think it needs to be heard. Hillingdon taxpayers are increasingly paying for the Conservatives' growing borrowing debt. In past Labour amendments, we've removed the administration's pipe dream projects such as theatres and museums, which the Conservatives have reluctantly adopted after budget meetings. Labour has already saved Hillingdon taxpayers thousands in debt repayments and prevented further service cuts. In addition to making savings on the Civic Centre development, this balanced and costed Labour amendment shows the proactive approach needed by this council to take on the climate change crisis. No more dawdling, no more thinking that this will go away if we again bury our heads in the sand. By starting the investment in renewable energy immediately, we will be able to start the journey of truly taking on the climate change crisis. The Conservative inaction on both saving our planet and the Council's finances is clearly obvious. Our amendment shows the residents the direction of travel as it invests in solar panels to reduce emissions and our reliance on fossil fuels. It also saves 33% of energy costs on the next 5 years. Investing in solar panels through this amendment is just the start. We would invest in leasing council land for solar farms, improve carbon emissions on new and existing housing stock, bring forward investment in electric vehicles, things that we've been pushing through this chamber for many years. We would also have cross-cutting saving initiatives across the council that work in ways that both sustainably help the environment and the finances of the council. Working more environmentally also works for the council's finances. So in this amendment, we start with a modest amount of investment in renewals that can be scaled over time. Can I remind Conservatives tonight that if you vote against this amendment, you are voting against our climate change action plan. You're voting against taking action on carbon emissions. Because if we do not make fossil fuel reductions in the coming year, To achieve at least 33% on energy cost savings in 5 years, we will not meet the Climate Change Action Plan commitments. So let me remind residents, we cannot afford the Conservatives' inaction on this important issue. This amendment isn't all about savings, it's about investment. Investment in services that have been under Conservative, deliberate decline for years. We are proposing using the £250,000 savings from the library service to reinvest back into our libraries, to get rid of their reduced hours, reopening them to the public. This reinvestment would be funded by making savings through co-locating services. Our bid review in Table 3 are just the start of the savings that Hillingdon Labour have identified. We would use the libraries to bring more services together, making them the community hubs they ought to be, the one-stop shop supporting residents in their health, their safety and their prosperity. And I'm sure now they've heard it from Labour, the Conservatives will say it's their ideas, they've already had them on the pipeline, but we never see the details. And how can we have services that co-locate at libraries that aren't open? Bid reviews in these areas will save the council a further £275,000 this coming year, balancing our proposed amendment and saving the council's finances and bridging the Conservatives' £5.68 million budget gap in 5 years. We would also invest in additional educational psychologists and support processing the education, health and care plans, removing backlogs and ensuring the needs are identified early, helping the council and designated school grants to make savings, as well as keep pupils, where possible, in mainstream settings. This improves education standards, which have deliberately declined under the Conservative administration. Surrounding London boroughs have been doing this for years, but Hillingdon Conservatives have been characteristically slow on the take-up. I'm surprised with their observations on surrounding boroughs they haven't noticed. To ensure this amendment to the budget is balanced, we are proposing reducing the Conservative administration's marketing and public relations budget. In a time when residents need us to prioritise our spending, excessive publications and marketing is wasteful use of taxpayers' money. Cutting costs in marketing will pay for an increased investment in community safety, as well as reduce Hillingdon's high crematorium fees for bereaved families. If Conservative colleagues vote against this, they are voting against safer communities in favour of excessive marketing, and would ask them where their priorities are. So, let me remind at this point, this amendment is balanced as it cuts excessive borrowing, makes energy and financial efficiencies, invests in transformations of services which have already suffered from the Conservatives' deliberate decline, and reduces the council's marketing and PR budget. Adopting this amendment will also invest £35 million in our highways, roads and pavements, making most of the £15 million investment from the Greater London Authority in the next 5 years. Labour's amendment will invest £5 million in community spaces and facilities in the Useley and Cowley area, areas which have generated significant income for this council over recent years. This amendment shows Labour will invest in our communities. We will work with residents, and in doing so, will not be removing protective covenants from public land. This amendment redresses the lack of listening from this Conservative administration, who failed to listen to Useley and Cowley residents about the developments of Otterfield Road and Falling Lane, just as they failed to listen to West Drayton residents in 2018, trying to insert a full-time dump on residents' doorsteps. I see a bit of a trend here. Our youth sector needs investment. The Labour amendment does just that. By opening up part of the Youth Capital Fund to non-uniformed youth groups, we are able to support a much broader portion of children and teenagers, as well as invest in the additional youth bus. The Conservatives have failed to deliver this bus that they promised so many years ago. They've failed to deliver a flexible approach to meeting the needs of young people, giving them a positive alternative and diversion from the dangers of crime and other poor life outcomes. Our final capital change reflects Labour's desire to enhance heritage sites, such as the Battle of Britain Bunker, through charitable sector partnerships, being proud of our heritage and engaging with the community simultaneously. I'm very happy to explain further how to work with the voluntary sector. Our capital amendment reflects our approach to listening to and working with residents, which is much needed in this budget to help create thriving communities and build a better borough. Labour's budget amendment invests in public health. Following the pandemic, which isn't over, we are all aware of the impact on residents' mental and physical health. Using the public health grant uplift, the amendment will support schemes that promote COVID resilience over the next year. Schemes such as, but not exclusive to, outdoor gym instructors, discounted for gyms and wellbeing facilities for those on the lowest incomes. Some of those on the lowest incomes with risk of poor outcomes need help from the council above and beyond which others that can afford to may require. We also will work with the voluntary sector to pump prime and uplift in resources available to the mental health provision for young people. We have been on the doorsteps across the borough and residents are concerned about community safety, which the council plays such a key role in. We are grateful for the investment of the Mayor of London in 25 police officers for Uxbridge, despite the government's continued reduction in budgets for the police. We are providing an injection through this amendment into community safety, strengthening our team to be able to work with communities, enabling better joined-up working and building community buy-in, working with residents to build a better and safer borough from Yeading to Useley and Harefield to Heathrow. I appreciate it. This investment, however, will be completely undermined if the budget does not include a review of the antisocial behaviour and environment team, ASBET. The deliberate decline of this service by the Conservative administration has meant noise complaints are slow to be processed. Reports of fly tipping by residents and Labour councillors are not resolved, such as piles reported many months on Holly Gardens, to name a few.
Yeah, absolutely.
Neighbour disputes drag on for years, debilitating people's mental health, and environmental hazards are not removed. A Labour administration would support officers to adopt a holistic and zero tolerance to anti-social behaviour, not bury our heads in the ground. This amendment will also enable the council to reverse the deliberate decline in the maintenance of council housing stock. Many millions mentioned, but actually joined up working not happening. By piloting community estate managers via the housing revenue account, the Labour amendment shows the need to work with council tenants collaboratively to proactively care and repair for our council housing stock. Housing tenants and leaseholders are fed up with multiple repair visits just for the same issue to reoccur or not to get resolved at all. What a waste of taxpayers' money. What a waste of rentpayers' money. I have numerous examples of vulnerable residents left out in the cold without heating this winter, without support and without solutions that often take weeks. Not even an electric heater provided to help them immediately. This administration's inaction shows they are ineffective, and our approach to working with residents should pay for itself in coming years, saving rentpayers and the council many thousands. The Conservative administration has lost touch with residents. They are building developments in the wrong places and not providing the much-needed homes residents are looking for. The Labour amendment adds a modest increase to the investment into Hillingdon First Limited to increase the amount of homes delivered, whilst ensuring the affordable and social housing elements for both this and the HRA are maintained and increased. This is essential for Hillingdon residents. This capital investment pays for itself in future years. As it is a modest amount, it does not increase the risk to the current house building delivery model. Mr. Mayor, this amendment helps residents in this Conservative cost of living crisis. This amendment will proactively take on the climate change crisis. And this amendment will show residents that the need to replace this crisis-riddled, apathetic Conservative administration with a Labour administration in May that is energetic, that is ambitious, and that is ready to stand in residents' corner to build a better borough to build a better Hillingdon. I move.
Do we have a seconder? Councillor Curling.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I second and reserve my right.
Thank you. Councillor Edwards.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. This is a dangerous amendment. It will not deliver a better borough, but a broke borough. We've already heard the advice that our reserves need to be above £20 million, and at 26.5, the Labour amendment seeks to throw away half of that margin of safety in an unwise move to bring down the council tax below that which we are proposing. This in a time of a highly uncertain future, of inflation, COVID legacy, and now the economic impact of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. This is worse than unwise, it is irresponsible. It bakes in a continual downward slide for the next 3 years, and the halt to that slide is based on two vague programmes that are dishonest. The first, the reduction of 1/3 of the energy cost rises, perversely by removing £10 million investment from the civic centre, which it needs to become thermally efficient. It would undermine the use of space, which we've already heard from Councillor Goddard, how we wish to commercialise that, to deliver further income. And the only answer in their capital programme changes is a one-off £200,000 investment in solar panels. And they expect us to believe that will deliver a saving of £580,000 after 3 years. The most unethical of solar panel salesmen would not claim such a return on investment. Arguably the worst, though, is the idea that pumping more money into Hillingdon's building company, Hillingdon First, will somehow, through their Labour alchemy, deliver a better and bigger stream of income. Hillingdon First Limited focus on mid-sized developments of 10 to 50 units. There are a limited number of opportunities each year, and forcing additional investment will force the company into smaller builds, reducing the return on investment, or forcing them into larger builds, resulting in far higher risk. Excessive investment in property companies is a failed tactic. They have not learned from their own colleagues elsewhere in London, in Croydon, where they invested £200 million in a housing development company, and the council went bust because of its reckless investment. And at that time, it's reported that that housing company had not made a single dividend payment. The idea that an annual structural deficit can be eliminated by these two means is just not credible. It won't stave off the inevitable service cuts, even with maximum future council tax rises. If our Labour opposition were to gain power, Hillingdon would become like Harrow. The drawdown on reserves would increase. And I quote from Labour's their report
Edwards.
that Harrow are in a grave financial position, facing a very difficult budget decision. Thank you. I oppose this amendment.
Councillor Bianco.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. In case it wasn't clear from what the leader has just said, this administration will not be supporting this amendment to our budget. Mr Mayor, for 20 years now, this administration has been setting budgets for this borough without interruption. For 18 of those years, they were delivered by me, under the wise and learned guidance of Councillor Sir Ray Puddifoot. And for the last 2 years, they've been expertly delivered by my colleague, Councillor Goddard. All those budgets have two fundamental things in common. Firstly, they delivered the services to our residents that they have come to expect. And secondly, and most importantly, they were financially prudent. In every one of those years, from 2002 to the present day, the Labour Party has moved their own version of a budget before then voting for ours. It is fair to say that not once in all those years was their budget either sensible or prudent, and tonight is the crowning glory in recklessness and financial idiocy. Mr Mayor, I can imagine them all sat in their group meeting, scratching their collective heads, trying to decide what to scribble down on the back of their proverbial envelope. I have no doubt that their leading financial brain came up with this plan, guided no doubt by the kind words of Chairman MacDonald, the past Shadow Chancellor. No thought was given to the known facts, no concerns voiced that if this Conservative administration couldn't come up with a 0% budget in election year, there just may be a valid reason for this, and no thought was given to the hardships that would subsequently unfold on our residents if their plans were to be realised. Mr. Mayor, we only have to look at one of their frankly laughable suggestions to know that this whole construct is nothing more than a house of cards waiting to fall down. As probably the only person present tonight with a good knowledge of property development, I was astounded to see the plans they have to expand the work of Hillingdon First, our in-house development company, in the hope of producing extra profits which they could then use elsewhere to prop up their profligacy. Mr. Mayor, don't you think if it was that easy to simply expand this work, we would have already done it? Yeah. This proposal clearly shows that the Labour group has no idea how these processes work, and if you don't believe me, then you only have to look at their recent attempts to block Hillingdon's first Useley scheme, to know that either their plans are a complete sham, or like their predecessors, they are only one step away from building anywhere they can, including on our green belt. Mr. Mayor, simply putting more money into a project doesn't make it happen quicker. We on this side are the only ones who know how to look after our residents' hard-earned cash, and clearly residents themselves agree, as they have shown in 2002, 6, 10, 14 and 18, and will surely do again this year.
Bianco. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, this amendment is unsound, financially imprudent, and not fit for our residents.
Councillor Mills.
Mr. Mayor, you couldn't make it up, but I do want to congratulate Councillor Mathers for keeping such a straight face whilst delivering one of the most incompetent budgets we've ever had from a Labour administration. We are used to them coming to this chamber with their student union debates, but tonight we've had adolescents mathematics. They are fundamentally wrong, financially and politically. And if they were seriously concerned about the cost of living crisis, we would have heard from them that they were wrong in asking the residents of this borough to vote for Sadiq Khan, who is the biggest cause of the increase that is going to be going through on council tax bills this year. It is their policies, Labour policies, that always undermine people's wallets. And if you don't believe that, they will find that out when they talk to the residents of this borough, and residents have to make a choice between us, who have managed the resources of this authority and delivered the services that residents want and require and need, to the comparisons to which the Labour Party are offering, and to which the Labour Party in our neighbouring boroughs and what Mayor Khan is constantly doing. Labour use residents as a chequebook. We use residents by putting them first and delivering services. And one very simple example from their budget, which he didn't mention, surprising. They are going to cut, there's no other word for it, it's not a saving, it's a Labour cut to the Chrysalis programme.
Shameful.
And if there is one part of our budget that is about putting residents first and allowing residents to have an involvement so that they can decide whether it's their community centre, their park, their path, whatever it is, over the years, which gets improvements. You can mock, but it's actually the bit which residents appreciate. Because it is actually what about residents first is all about. And Labour are going to cut it. So in Hillingdon, the numbers don't add up. The biggest risks are going to be taken at a time when they're going to run down balances on a day when the war breaks out in parts of Europe and no one knows what's going to happen to the commodities and the pricing in the months ahead. They're cutting back on the things that residents actually value. The message is clear-cut. A proven track record of Conservatives actually putting residents first, or a gamble and a student politics approach with the hope, that they will cover the gap against their amendment.
We're having fantastic debate. Could I just ask everybody to keep an eye on the clock, please? There's a little leeway, but not too much, please. Councillor Simmonds.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think we should commend the Labour group this evening for their sense of humour in bringing forward this amendment to tonight's budget. But that really is where the commendation needs to end. And it is right that this administration is focusing on how to support residents at a time when we know, for the reasons outlined by a number of colleagues, that we face significant financial challenges. It's positive that in this borough we are seeing rising wages, we're seeing increased availability both of extra hours and new jobs. But I will say what I think will really help residents, that goes much further than the £11 saving which is outlined in this amendment. And that's the fact that 20 million households in this country will benefit from £150 council tax rebate, including 95% of rental households across the whole of England, a government initiative taken in recognition of the fact that residents in all of our local authority areas will be facing a challenge that benefits everybody in council tax bands A to D. And in addition to that, what will help is the additional £144 million for discretionary support for local authorities, so that those lower income households who may be in more expensive council tax band properties will be able to gain the kind of support at the discretion of this administration that they need, a step far further than anything that is outlined or envisaged by this amendment. Now, there are many of us who are going to be exiting this council at the local elections, but this is the 24th time I've been in this chamber for a budget in Hillingdon, and the first of those budgets that were set in this chamber was a Labour budget. And let's recall a 14.8% council tax increase. Let me just say that again, 14.8% council tax increase, with millions of unspecified efficiency savings, and offering up large areas of our greenbelt for development in the desperate search for resources to try and balance a seriously broken budget. Mr. Mayor, what this amendment simply does not recognise is that the sound financial management of Conservative administrations has served this vibrant, prosperous and diverse borough extraordinarily well in the last few decades. It's been a privilege and honour to serve as a Conservative member, and it will be my pleasure to vote to reject this amendment, to support this budget which continues to support our residents well.
Thank you. Can I just remind members again not to be switching on their microphones? It's sad for me to actually remind people again because look, it's poor show. Yeah? So if that happens again, then I'll have to name the member and obviously take advice from Lloyd. Councillor Corthorne.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There has always been something predictable about Labour's approach to budget setting. As seasoned observers of the process, particularly at this stage of the electoral cycle, will know. For whatever the detail of their budget amendment, we can be sure that they will be incoherent and brimming with opportunism and gesture politics with their own threadbare prospectus. And sure enough, true to form, this time we are treated to a range of spurious measures, with figures seemingly plucked out of thin air, barely explored or touched upon in select committee discussions, nor properly road tested, all designed to convey the impression that the Labour group have thought long and hard about their own approach to budget setting. Some hope of that, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, we've got used to making savings, doing more with less, transforming services and improving outcomes. It's been the name of the game in local government for more than a decade. We are, after all, the most efficient part of the public sector. You might say we've been too successful at it for our own good, especially in Hillingdon over the years. We've also grown used to Labour members complaining about resources, first on POPs and then in select committees. They routinely denounce what they prefer to call cuts, and we've heard it again this evening, and yet with straight faces and without a blush, they pitch up this evening with an amendment which proposes freezing the council tax and fees and charges. It's beyond the limits of credulity, and who on earth they think they're fooling, I do not know, Mr. Mayor. We are all very much aware of the cost of living pressures. They are very real, and no one likes increasing the council tax, least of all us. But residents recognise that costs are increasing. We can't defy gravity, and that sound financial management requires making difficult calls at times. And our proud record of delivering service improvements over the years bears testimony to the value of this approach. Mr Mayor, quite honestly, I think the best service the Labour Group could perform for the residents of this borough is to use what influence they have with their profligate political soulmate, Sadiq Khan, who, like Kevin Livingstone before him, sees Outer London as a cash cow to freeze and indeed cut his precept. This amendment really takes cynicism to new heights, gesture politics of which the Labour Group are consummate exponents. Anyone would think there's an election in the offing. In concluding, Mr Mayor, I will say just one thing to members opposite. Do not underestimate the residents of this borough. Do not take them for fools. You do that at your peril. We oppose the motion.
Councillor Yarrow.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I've been on this council for 26 years, and I'm sure you'll all be delighted to know that this will be the last time that I will probably be speaking. And for the last 20 years, I've listened to many of the Labour budgets, usually produced on the back of a cigarette packet. But this time, however, I have to congratulate them because they have presented a proper budget appraisal for scrutiny. This year, they propose a freeze of the council tax, whilst last year they proposed an increase of 1%. I wonder why. Is it because there is an election in May and it's colouring their thought processes? How are they going to pay for the freezing of the council tax? Well, in Labour terms, that's extremely easy. You just take 3 million of the balances and all will be well. Labour state then that the amendments, it'll be helped by the amendments to the capital programme of 800,000 by 26-27, with a further saving of 580,000, and the word anticipated is used, from a 33% reduction in energy costs stemming from carbon reduction measures and energy efficiency. It was at this point that I remembered what Harold Macmillan said when asked by an interviewer what was the most troubling properties of his prime ministership. And he thought for a while and he said, events, dear boy, events. And now the events are with us. Energy savings can be positive, but energy cost savings are in fact now a fantasy, a total fantasy. Our future is unstable thanks to the Russian imperialism. I would rather have balances safe for that rainy day which will occur rather than spent on an election gimmick produced by student politics and not in the real world. Mr Mayor, you won't be surprised to find that I cannot support this amendment. Thank you.
Councillor Sweeting.
Mr Mayor, I speak in support of the Labour amendments, which seek to build a better borough and tackle Conservative inaction. Youth services have felt the brunt of this inaction, as the vibrant services of decades ago has been reduced to a rump, caused by the constant salami slicing of its budget. Yes, there is capital funding for the very laudable uniformed groups, but this disguises the shrivelled service now being delivered in youth centres and otherwise by our own council. In recent years, the budget for this service has been slashed from many millions to a mere 400,000. And doesn't it show in the way in which some of our young people are losing their way? Cuts and further cuts mean that some most in need of help are not supported and shown a better way, leading them to find a way of their own, with consequences for us all. The extra youth bus, promised so long ago but not delivered, but now forming an important part of the Labour amendment, will be just a small step in reinvigorating a service which is on its knees Evidence of this, 7 youth centres, 1 permanently closed, 3 closed at present, leaving just a rump of 3 with limited hours and with activities mainly supporting youngsters who have predominantly already found the right way, rather than those who have not. Universal youth services run by the council standing up and supporting our youngsters will give many who are not now engaged the support they need. Conservative inaction on community safety needs to be measured against Hillingdon's increased incidence of antisocial behaviour, which is a disease which seriously affects the lives of so many, and inaction is not the way to stop it. The council's ASBIT team, criticised only recently by the council's own internal audit, requires a root and branch shake-up in order to address the more challenging cases. Our Labour amendment will deliver a larger community safety team, a reinvigorated ASBIT team, and CCTV cameras in crime and antisocial behaviour hotspots, which will go some way in addressing this modern-day plague. If at last the council erects posts high enough to mount them, apparently a challenge as our lamp posts are just too short. The Labour amendments will turn back the slow but deliberate decline some services have had to endure. Remember, Hillingdon residents watching tonight, you may not be aware of a loss of emancipation. Support the amendment.
Thank you. Councillor Eginton.
I'll wait. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I'm speaking in favour of the amendment, and specifically to explain 2 of the Labour group's proposals to improve the services available to all families in Hillingdon. Firstly, our intention is to reuse the bid savings identified in the budget proposals to transform our libraries. You will have noticed the changes to the opening hours of our libraries. They are no longer open at lunchtimes or in the evenings. That effectively means that many working people are unable to make use of the facilities, and often it is them who should be encouraged to use the library service, both to enhance their lives and support the education of their children. Our aim will be to provide a better service to all families, and using the buildings as community hubs, these will offer health and other support, especially for the most vulnerable residents. We are also aware of the possible risk of a digital divide, as many are not confident using electronic equipment, so support will be focused to assist where required. Secondly, I would like to highlight the additional expenditure on educational psychologists. As we are all now aware, the greatest risk to the stability of this council's finances is a deficit on the designated schools budget. This is entirely due to expenditure, currently 25% in excess of the grants received for high needs education. Although the council is desperately seeking a bailout from the Prime Minister, there needs to be a sea change in relations with the schools community. Education psychologists can play a strong role in helping to identify the needs of children at a very early stage in their development. By providing a better service to infant schools and nurseries, we would expect to be able to provide the additional help for these young children. Often, this support has proved to reduce the child's need for expensive special school education and school travel to a later stage. The council offering this support to all infant classes and nurseries is both a positive way to help the children as well as a way of indicating to the education community our dedication to assisting them. And that will also, in the long run, save money on the general fund. As a basis of these issues, as well as the others listed, I ask members to support this amendment. Thank you.
Councillor Gardner has asked me for special. She can sit down and say her piece. You can switch on your speaker now.
Oh, can I? I must apologise, but while Councillor Goddard was speaking, my son, who lives in a Conservative-controlled council, said, "I can't see you, Mum. Can you turn the camera on?" So I did. Okay. Mr Mayor, I speak in favour of this amendment, obviously, but on one particular item, that is the employment of community estate managers. Those of us here who work with both tenants and leaseholders on the estates in our wards know how difficult it is for the residents to get problems solved in a timely fashion. If there were community estate managers in place, they'd know both the area incredibly well and the residents, the same as most of us councillors do. And as such, they would be the first point of contact for residents in an emergency, a bit like a proper one-door policy. Am I amusing you, Mr Mayor? Sorry, can I carry on? It effectively would save the council money, as the residents would have to contact a variety of people just to get someone to make a note of their problems. As every sensible person knows, if you're told about and identify a problem early on, it means it can be solved, and therefore it doesn't become a bigger, more expensive problem to rectify in the future. The recent storm has shown how stretched our teams are, especially in terms of getting the work that needs doing being given out to and action by contractors. I personally would also prefer the trades to be brought back in-house, managed by us, so they are ready to respond as soon as necessary. That's something we will action when we take control in May. No? I work on the theory that if you give all the residents on the estates the ability to speak to one named person and control what they need doing and when they need it doing, they are no longer part of the problem, they are actually part of the solution. Thank you.
Councillor Richard Mills.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I think the biggest disappointment is the lack of consistency in the Labour group's approach. And this probably further demonstrates their own lack of internal cohesion and infighting. And I appreciate Councillor Mathers is spending a lot of time looking to become the leader of the opposition. But rather than focusing on that, if they look at what they actually say when they're in the select committees and formerly the policy overview committees, they'll see that some of the things they're looking to get rid of tonight, they've continued to support. And having chaired the committee that looked into the voluntary sector throughout the pandemic, one of the biggest things that came out of that was how Hillingdon people are so widely used and appreciated by our residents. As Councillor Eginton just said, not all residents can use digital. They're not all digital savvy, they don't get the Twitter updates, they're not on the website. That review showed the importance of sending out paper communications to our residents, signposting them to important things including mental health support. This was well supported by our fellow colleague Councillor Dillon. We wonder why he's not here tonight to support this amendment. In terms of financial judgment, Mr Mayor, I think the Labour group need to look at their own choices. Let's think back to last May ahead of the Charleville by-election. This is a group who hired an external person, spending £30,000 or thereabouts on an election campaign organiser. Now, they will admit that they themselves selected a candidate who was a disaster for them. But only this Labour group could demonstrate financial acumen of spending additional money, hiring an expert, and ending up worse off. The message to Hillingdon residents is if this is how they use their own money, imagine what they would do with yours.
Councillor Prince.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just before I start, I just want to welcome our organiser who's sitting in the public gallery, who I'm sure loved that. I'm delighted to speak in support of this fully costed budget amendment, because Hillingdon Labour values are ones that recognise and seek to address the struggles that ordinary people face. This council will know that I care fiercely about mental health and the importance of responding to mental illness as soon as it presents, and that there must be a key focus on prevention of mental illness. The pandemic will have had an impact on young people's mental health that we haven't even seen yet, and we must be on top of this. No waiting around until waiting lists increase even more. But now, I welcome this investment in Labour's amendment. The amendment also allocates money to support care leavers, that we would work with care leavers to decide how to spend, nothing about them without them. Along with Councillor Dennis and Councillor Mcwana, I've had the privilege of serving on the corporate parenting panel, and it has been, hands down, my favourite part of being a councillor. The pandemic will have hit them in ways many of us won't be able to understand. And unlike others their age, they don't often have family members that can help them get through this pandemic emotionally or otherwise. But we can be there, we can help them. And this funding will go a long way to support them in pursuing their happiest and healthiest selves. Mr Mayor, in our amendment, we have frozen the core element of council tax. We have done the numbers, we have worked with officers to achieve this goal. We are confident that we can deliver it. If you are living month to month, scrimping in the days running up to payday because you don't have enough money to get by, this will make a huge difference. It is going to be a difficult year made harder by this Conservative government. We believe we can do more to help. I'm sure this Conservative administration is going to continue to tell us why this is unworkable, but at the last Cabinet, during the discussion on the Council's proposed budget, we heard the Leader of the Council and other Cabinet members talk about the cost of living and how proud the administration was to be able to offer a slightly smaller increase in council tax than they originally proposed. A smaller increase is of course welcome in comparison to a larger one, but Hillingdon Labour are proposing a freeze on the core element of council tax. Our amendment is better. This amendment is costed, workable, and will help people at a time when the cost of living is biting. It has been an honour to have been part of developing this amendment and to have been a part of this Labour group led by Councillor Curling and Councillor Mathers. They are the best of this council. This amendment will help residents and I am proud to back it. Better for residents, better for Hillingdon.
Mr Mayor, if I just bring everybody up to date where we are on the debate on the amendment. We have no other speakers indicated, except that we have Councillor Curling, who reserved his right and has unlimited speaking time. We have Councillor Goddard, who has a right to reply as the mover of the original motion, and Councillor Mathers has a right to reply as the mover of the amendment. But we don't go to them unless we're sure there are no other speakers. Okay.
Councillor Curling.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. As I've got unlimited time, before I read my speech, I would just say a few other things. Time is moving on. I think this is the first budget speech I've had where we've had a 45-minute opening speech. The first budget meeting we've had where we've had numerous, in fact tons of the Conservative group speaking on our amendment, and then having the audacity to say, are there any more speakers? Let's move on a bit because time's getting on. Sorry, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. That is my job, but thank you very much for that.
I've got around about a 5-minute speech here, but I'll make it last about 15, just to annoy them. Mr Mayor, if there is student politics on this side, tonight it's shown that there's infantile politics on that side. Mr Mayor, it seems that everything we suggest to be done, they've done already. But then they're so confident in what they've done already, they're going to vote against it. Where is the logic in that? Anyway, back to why we're here and back to why I'm standing here. I'm standing here to proudly second the Labour amendment to the Council's budget. These amendments not only build on our previous amendments, most of which the Conservative administration have implemented after voting against them, but these amendments also show that Labour has the vision and the drive to build a better borough, especially after the last couple of years of trauma and turbulence that the pandemic has caused. These amendments will improve public health services and support all our residents through the pandemic recovery and beyond. We will build a better borough by ensuring that our proposed investment of £250,000 is used to support community resilience. We'll also recognise that there's been an extra demand on mental health services, especially for our young people who have had to deal with such a lot of issues throughout the pandemic, as well as the ever-increasing pressure that our young people face in their adolescence and their young adulthood. By our investment in mental health services to the under-16s, we are investing in our future, and with our vision and drive for improvements in public health, Labour will build a better borough. The Labour amendment is also Labour amendments also invest in community safety, which is of huge concern to the residents across the borough. A clear message that the residents have given us whilst we've been touring the borough, listening to their concerns, is that their safety and that of their families has been a significant worry and concern to them all. So we are proposing significant investment and a root and branch review of our antisocial behaviour services so that we can shape the services to be more responsive to the real issues that concern our residents, with the residents' voices not only being heard but also shaping those services to deliver what's required. Hillingdon Labour has the vision and the drive to improve community safety and build a better borough. In order to have a safe and secure borough with thriving local communities, we need truly affordable homes within those communities. We don't need more blocks of flats, totally unaffordable flats that provide nothing more than opportunities for investors at the detriment of maintaining and building better communities for our residents to thrive. These amendments show a greater investment from Hillingdon Labour to use the mechanisms of the council more effectively than the current Conservative administration, so that we can provide better, fully affordable, truly affordable homes within enhanced communities. Hillingdon Labour has the vision and the drive to enhance our homes and communities and build a better borough. The environment is also of great concern to the residents, and our amendments help address those concerns. Renewable energy is a significant part of improving our environment and generating our energy. The council should lead the way in ensuring that everything possible is being done not only to meet but exceed its net carbon zero targets. Of course, the environment also includes ensuring that our parks and open spaces are maintained and improved. Hillingdon Labour has the vision and the drive to invest and improve the environment and build a better borough. Mr Mayor, these amendments come from the Labour Group as a result of a clear vision for our borough, which has been formed by actually listening to the residents and taking on board their views of how their council should be serving them. We have listened to the residents throughout the borough, and we are acting on what they have told us. We therefore had hoped that the administration would vote for these amendments, that not only set a lower council tax to the one that they propose, but also invests in the areas that need investment and tackles the issues of most concern to our residents. Unfortunately, the Conservative group will be voting against our amendment, but needless to say, they'll try to implement some of them as they have done in the past. However, this is an election year, and whilst our ideas can be copied, it's only a Labour administration that has the vision and the drive to implement such proposals properly. The voters in May will have a clear choice between the current inexperienced leadership of a stale and out-of-touch Conservative administration who think that they can dictate and impose upon the residents rather than listening to them and serving them, and a Labour group with the vision and drive to place the council at the heart of the community and truly serve the residents, not just with platitudes of a hollow, worn-out slogan, but actually serve them and build a better borough. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Goddard.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Councillor Curling may need not worry. I'm not going to treat him to another 45 minutes of my rhetoric. Mr Mayor, this amendment represents the very worst attempt at intention grabbing as we head towards the local elections in May. These proposals are ill-considered and reckless in their content. As I've explained in my earlier speech, we face a challenging environment over the next few years, yet what do we see? We see the opposition proposing an amendment which is characterised by frivolous spending, unrealistic and unproven savings, speculative changes to a carefully constructed capital programme, and profligate and high-risk use of general balances. The opposition believes that its measures will deplete general balances by £3 million. Given the vague and unverified nature of their savings proposals, I expect that this amendment would actually result in a far greater reduction, which would take general balances down very close, if not below, the new lower level of £20 million. Have they ignored the professional advice provided by the Corporate Director of Finance? or perhaps they don't understand it. The amendment seeks to cut £10 million of capital from the Civic Centre project and £5 million from our roads programme. Both of these are important, necessary and worthwhile initiatives which the opposition seem intent on destroying. They're relying on savings from energy costs and lower interest costs which are plucked out of the sky. This is in stark contrast to this Conservative administration's prudent and careful approach to savings. I strongly suspect that when this amendment is defeated this evening, the opposition will vote in favour of our budget proposals, as they always do. This year, they will be fantasising that they might win the local election, and that confronted with that situation, they would far rather prefer to start with our financial position than their own. If the catastrophe of a Labour win were to ensue, we would, I am sure, see further examples of ignorance, bad judgment, and a complete absence of financial acumen, such as illustrated by tonight's amendment. Big increases in council tax would ensue, and once their reckless and irresponsible behaviour has emptied the coffers, just like Mayor Khan, they would seek to blame everyone else but themselves as they chase a government bailout. Mr. Mayor, thank goodness that this is a fantasy and it's not going to happen. I therefore oppose this amendment for all the reasons stated.
Councillor Mathers.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, let me be clear. This Labour amendment is fully balanced over 5 years. It helps steady up the council's finances and is financially prudent. Their own measures in the budget with their council tax reduction increase the unidentified savings that will put us below the thresholds of reserves if they can't find them, and they do not yet identify them. And they undermine and discredit the finance team who have worked with us by saying the costings are not realistic. These ideas have been researched, they've been formed over many months, and they know they have no credible answer, so they cry about it in a different way. If our amendments were so poor over the years, why did they vote against them and then accept them anyway through implementing them? Residents should not believe the Conservatives when they say they won't cut services. They have. Residents should not believe the Conservatives that the house building programme, their own model of delivery through Hillingdon First Limited, is about making money. It's not. It's about building the much needed housing. It's about creating from the mere 50 to 100. There's plenty of land in the pipeline. There's plenty of products available. It's just about gently encouraging it forward with an investment. And on the GLA increase in council tax, let's not forget what this money is spent on. Transport, police, the fire brigade. Which of these would the Conservatives want to cut? The fact of the matter is the National Conservative government chronically underfund London continuously on a political pursuit to undermine the Labour Mayor of London. It's grotesque. Playing with Londoners' lives and services just to try and get one up on the Labour London Mayor, a repeated rhetoric we hear from the other side. This Labour amendment has shown where savings can be made to balance things. It's honest with residents. It shows which services will be invested in and which won't. It also brings the question to residents' minds of which services will the Conservatives get rid of? Is it the weekly bin collections? Is it reduced care for the elderly? Is it closing more children's centres or youth centres? Or will it just be burying their heads in the sand and let debt rise to 38 million, such as the DSG? Can I remind the Chamber, this amendment helps residents with the cost of living crisis. It tackles the climate change crisis, and it replaces the crisis-ridden, apathetic Conservative administration before us with a Labour one in May. Please support this amendment.
We go to the vote now.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As I'm sure members are aware by now, it's now a legal requirement to have named votes on all votes to do with the budget. So I will ask each member in alphabetical order if they are voting for the proposed amendment as shown on pages 6 to 10 of the order of business, against the amendment or abstaining. Councillor Ahmad Wallah.
Sorry, Lord, could I once again remind members, second reminder, switch off your phones, please. It's just disrespectful and it's wrong, and you know that. Thank you.
Okay, so once again, for the amendment, against the amendment, or abstain. Councillor Ahmad Wallana.
Against the amendment.
Councillor Allen. Councillor Arnold.
Against
Councillor Barnes? Cllr Bianco? Cllr Birra? Cllr Bliss? Cllr Bridges? Cllr Brightman? Cllr Burrows? Cllr Chubadar?
Against.
Cllr Cooper? Cllr Corthorne? Cllr Curling? Cllr Dennis? Cllr DeVille? Cllr Dillon is not here. Cllr Dott? Cllr Duncan is here now.
4.
Thank you. Cllr Edwards? Cllr Eginton?
4.
Cllr Farley? Cllr Flynn? Cllr Gardner? Cllr Goddard? Cllr Hensley? Cllr Higgins? Cllr Hernji? Cllr Kaufman? Cllr Lavery? Cllr Lewis? Cllr McWanna? Cllr Markham? Cllr Mathers? Cllr Melvin? Cllr Milani? Cllr D Mills? Cllr R Mills? Cllr Money? Cllr Morgan? Cllr Nelson? Cllr O'Brien? Cllr Oswell? Cllr Palmer? Cllr Prince? Cllr Sir Ray Puddifoot? Cllr Riley? Cllr Rodrigues? Cllr Simmonds? Cllr Singh? Cllr Sullivan? Cllr Sweeting? Cllr Tuckwell? Cllr Yarrow? Madam Deputy Mayor? Mr Mayor? Thank you, Mr Mayor. That amendment is lost, and we return now to the debate on the original motion, to which further speakers can indicate. We have only Councillor Edwards who reserved his right at the moment.
Councillor Lavery.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm delighted to speak in support of this well thought out budget from the Conservative administration. I am responsible for a portfolio of much valued resident services, but I recognise that our ability to spend money on these high quality services is dependent on the continued sound financial management we demonstrate. In housing, I am particularly proud of the progress we are making with 2 Hayes regeneration projects, which will give us a net increase of 185 homes. These will also provide modern houses with considerably improved energy efficiency. The MTFF has a 5-year programme to upgrade our existing housing stock with new kitchens, bathrooms, windows and improved insulation. We are committed and we will deliver an increase of 500 properties in the HRA across the MTFF period. In the environment, we will continue with our tree planting programme, both in our parks, on our roads and surrounding our schools. The budget continues to invest in upgrades to our playgrounds across the borough. And I'm proud that our largest park investment is to be in Cranford Park Hayes, where we hope on-site work will begin shortly. Chrysalis under this budget will continue to have £1 million worth of funding. And I last year financed 21 projects across the borough. I continue to receive a large number of requests to finance projects from all parts of this borough. In waste services, we will continue to maintain our first-class waste services with weekly collection on all streams and no charges to our residents. For the benefit of the Labour group, the fly tipping statistics I have seen show a reduction over the last 12 months in reported fly tipping. Separate food waste service has been well received and will be further rolled out in the next 12 months. My congratulations to the waste and recycling team for their successful efforts at increasing take-up, particularly in the Hayes area. The first trials of food waste in flats will begin shortly. On climate change, the MTFF has committed 25 million of capital towards projects across the next 5 years. This is not a simple task, as the opposition would have us believe. Gains will occur in a number of ways, including the increased use of electric vehicles, which is already being pursued as part of our vehicle purchasing strategy, the provision of improved heating mechanisms and better installation in our housing stock. I urge all councillors to support this sound budget.
Councillor Riley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, back to a good, sound, economically robust, financially robust budget. The many achievements across my portfolio, which is extremely varied, are those that include shopfront and town centres, welcome back high street initiatives, roads and pavement expenditure, some of the highest expenditure that we have achieved with highways, with emphasis on footfall, road use and connectivity. Towpath upgrades, cycle route improvement, a subject close to my heart, cycling, walkway improvements, bike routes, lighting improvements, safety features for all our residents, and school initiatives encouraging healthy travel. Mr. Mayor, all of these areas are supported by this budget and add to the promotion of these areas, making a commitment going forward. Our ongoing fees and charges still make us an exceptionally competitive authority with comparison to any of our neighbours. And going forward, we have projects such as electric vehicle charging, healthy travel, cycling, and working with our safety partners to deliver a Hillingdon-centric community safety programme, including further investment in our CCTV to protect our residents. We're able to promote community action days, joining policing colleagues on visible events, adding to the value of the safety offer. Supporting Hillingdon Neighbourhood Watch and OWL, engaging the community to respond to issues of concern, building strong, resilient and cohesive communities who take pride in their local area. Mr. Mayor, this budget, this financial flume cascading us into the clear, successful waters of economic opportunity, allows this administration to maintain the great work of the past and the ever greater work of the future. Even against trying and difficult times, this administration can financially do what no other party could do. It takes us forward with strength in ideas, working hard for our residents. Our residents want this, we will deliver it, no one else can. We carry on the great tradition, putting residents first and putting them at the heart of everything we do.
Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I support this budget for clarity. The Chamber is now aware about our negotiations with the Department for Education regarding our dedicated schools grant safety valve agreement. This aim is to not only reduce but wipe out the deficit and to stride forwards with a robust transformation programme that will deliver extra capacity for our Hillingdon children with special educational needs. This is in addition to the early intervention work that was started back in 2019, as well as employing educational psychologists. 70% of our schools use this service. We will retain it. With thanks to our education team, 0.5% of primary and 85.3% of secondary school children residing in Hillingdon were offered school places at one of their top 3 preferences this year. There has been over 2,000 in-year applications for school places since last August, and officers working with schools and panels have made sure that presenting children, especially the most vulnerable, have been offered a place quickly, keeping out of school time to a minimum. We would not be in this fortunate placing position without our successful multi-million-pound Building Schools for the Future programme. Adult Education Service continues to target the most disadvantaged residents, many of whom are unemployed. This service continues to offer to enrolment to learn, retrain, upskill and receive recognised qualifications. 82% of learners are women. Many of our learners take part in ESOL classes, some for simple helping with day-to-day language barriers, others to assist with entry level into further and higher education. Libraries have been open for business for some time, albeit on a shorter day. However, more varied library hours will soon start to phase back in. With so many community activities you can now do at our libraries, long gone are the days when you went in simply for a book. We will move forwards next year with future-proofing our library spaces for the communities. Moving to wellbeing, this year, every opportunity where we have been able to, we have continued to offer a healthy choice to encourage residents to become more active. Our over 65s activity schemes will continue next year and in future. Our indoor sports and leisure facilities have been open since last year, welcoming back and seeing old faces that have previously been been more cautious. Work has started on our new leisure centre to serve the residents of Useley and West Drayton, and affirms that this administration's commitment to providing first-class leisure opportunities for local people. Next year, we will also move forwards with our vision for youth services in the borough. I can tell you this evening that we will have Easter and summer activities. Thank you very much. I support this budget.
Councillor Palmer.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It is uncharacteristic of me to extol the successes of my portfolio without recognising residents have experienced loss, bereavement, mental ill health and social isolation during this pandemic. Social work has maintained statutory services while adjusting and developing others. Our COVID hub has responded to need by delivering food parcels, lateral flow kits, PPE, laptops and making and receiving thousands of calls. The success of partnership working with our health colleagues has been acknowledged across London, the greatest example being the vaccination programme. The vaccination of care home staff ensured no impact for residents on staffing. 97% of residents with autism learning disabilities were vaccinated, making us one of the highest London boroughs. The Stronger Families Hub has resulted in early support offers with this 24 hours a day, 7-day-a-week service. A mental health hub launched, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, a fast response for mental health assessment. With safeguarding referrals doubling, an adult MASH was established, resulting in increased efficiency. Our fostering panel continued remotely, ensuring placements could continue, and our LAC children and families were supported and safeguarded. I witnessed the success of Grassy Meadows Court when visiting a resident I had assisted to move. The difference in a healthier appearance was emotional for me to see. The balance of mental health restored and the support allowing independence behind a front door with professional care on site in a modern purpose build has rejuvenated her life. Direct payments users received greater flexibility to ensure changing needs could be met. OT assessments moved to virtual face-to-face, which still continues in line with resident preferences. I could give so many more examples, but the fact that Hillingdon can deliver statutory services while introducing others in a pandemic is due to sound financial management, strong leadership and excellent staff. There is no apathy here, either with me or with my staff, our staff, I beg your pardon. Bankrupt, not blooming lightly, not this authority, deliberate improvement, not deliberate decline. I support this budget.
Councillor Curling.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, the budget before us contains much of the bread and butter of the workings of the council, so we will be voting in favour of the budget. But whilst we commit to improving things like the weekly waste collections and all the other services that the residents rely on, we do believe that this administration has become very tired and stale. The budget is full of Conservative inaction and failing financial management, although it is encouraging to hear that they are at last moving forward with Tony Blair's Building Schools for the Future programme. This budget lacks the vision and drive necessary to improve the lives of the residents. It lacks the innovation that can only come from a council that is at the heart of the community, a council that not only listens to the residents but serves them and empowers them. Mr. Mayor, we have seen this stale and out-of-touch Conservative administration vote against the amendments that came from listening to residents. They've not only voted against the Labour group, but they've voted against the overwhelming voices of the residents that we strive to serve. So after rejecting Hillingdon's Labour's costed savings programme, the Conservative administration and their failing financial management that has given us a massive £38 million deficit also proposes to increase borrowing and simply add to the unidentified savings gap. How exactly are they going to plug that gap? One has to wonder why they're not being more specific about how they are going to achieve these savings. Perhaps there are things that they don't want the residents to know. So what exactly is going to be cut? Perhaps there will be more charges for recreational facilities, like the tennis courts or maybe football pitches. Perhaps there'll be further cuts to libraries, or may even be a few closures. Maybe cuts to things like elderly dining clubs and cuts to the weekly waste collection. Perhaps more development on recreational land, more flats for investors and less affordable homes for families. Mr. Mayor, this inactive Conservative administration is devoid of the vision and drive needed in a post-pandemic world. It has lost its strong leadership, lost its focus, lost its way, and more importantly, lost the trust of the residents. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Eginton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Do you remember HOAC, the Hillingdon Outdoor Activity Centre? You may recall that this was a thriving place which offered many young people a chance to learn to sail, to kayak, and challenge themselves during their visits. But HOAC is closed, and HS2 is in the process of building the foundations for the viaduct there. Some 4 years ago, or more, agreement was reached with HS2 to provide funding of £26.5 million to relocate the centre to another site. The capital expenditure was included in the budget passed by this council in February 2018, with completion of the relocation by 2020. But nothing has been built. No new site identified, and the staff at the centre have not been able to access it for the past 18 months. The current proposal in the capital budget seems to be completing the replacement water sports centre by 2024, but even that assumes expenditure by the end of next month of £6 million. I really don't doubt it's going to happen. Had the relocation been organised as agreed in 2018, the transfer could have been made without any significant gap in the activities. Instead, this council has been begging HS2 to allow the delay again and again. Was the offer of £26.5 million time limited? I believe so. That is bad enough, but Conservative inaction means that it will now cost at least another £5 million. That's £50 for every single household in Hillingdon to build the new centre, unless there is value engineering, which of course means cuts. This is because the level of construction industry inflation is currently running at 25%. And the funding from HS2 is a fixed amount, no allowance for inflation. It is probably the only cost for HS2 which has not gone up. So either there will be a centre with less facilities, or this council will need to provide its own funds to make up the difference. This is a clear example of failing financial management by this Tory administration, or perhaps sinking financial management might be more appropriate.
Mr. Mayor, similar to the amendment debate, we only have two speakers still indicated, which is Councillor Edwards, who you wish to speak. Okay, didn't have you down, Councillor Sweeting and Councillor Prince.
Councillor Sweeting.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Prudence is often a word used by this Conservative council to describe its so-called good skill and judgment in its use of resources. Can this label be justified by looking at the way in which the high needs deficit has been managed, but allowed to grow to the dizzying heights of almost 40 million? So we are in the unenviable position of having one of the highest deficits of any council in the country. Because of this deficit, we've had to go to the Department for Education for help. Therefore, has this council acted prudently over the last 7 years as the deficit grew like topsy? Did they put in place measures, as our neighbouring Labour councils have done, to address the problem? Have they delivered more special school places, or have they merely, like the proverbial ostrich, placed head in hand, waiting and hoping, like Mr. McCorber, for something to turn up? We are faced with the consequences of this Conservative inaction, with the need to have a complete overhaul of special needs provision if we are to have the recovery plan accepted by government. A complete reset is demanded by government, with vital extra school places needed now. A great pity Hillingdon spent lots of time and money in unneeded and unused primary places instead. Labour members highlighted the problems of too many primary places costing millions and too few special school places so very often, and even in the previous Labour amendment, but our concerns were ignored. Badly done. Some 4 years ago at Council, I made the comment that at last West Drayton was to have its long-awaited swimming pool after much lobbying from Labour councillors for an area which has delivered millions in extra council tax. However, only now has the spade moved a little bit of earth. Perhaps a delay costing £8 million is due to the council not actually knowing its location, as in reports into Cabinet and Council month after month, year after year, it is described as being in Useley. And no matter how many times we tell them otherwise, it's still listed as the Useley Leisure Centre. Does the council need to have its sat-nav or Google Map service to find its way to West Drayton? Maybe this lack of geography is merely to confuse Useley residents who have seen most of their facilities zapped. Is the council calling the new facility the Useley Leisure Centre as compensation for their lost facilities, perhaps? But a very poor exchange, with Useley residents will remembering this. Once again, badly done.
Councillor Prince. Councillor Prince.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll just wait, that's fine. Thanks. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. These proposals in front of us are not as good as the ones we just debated, but we are where we are. I have listened to the speeches made by the Conservative Cabinet and their continued attempt at trying to defend the deficit in the school's budget. An administration that does not take a cumulative deficit of £38 million seriously is not one that deserves to have any power whatsoever. I can speak louder if people would prefer me to. When Labour raises our concerns that we are teetering on the edge of bankruptcy, that is not scaremongering. I note that the Cabinet member said that the Secretary of State would not authorise spending from the General Reserves to pay for the deficit, but how the deficit would be paid for if the government does not bail us out is a concern that residents will still have. I sincerely hope it won't be the Hillingdon taxpayer. When, during a Families Committee meeting some months ago, I asked a senior officer at this council whether bankruptcy would be what the council is facing if the government does not bail us out, and the answer he gave was yes. Now, as to whether a bailout is likely, I'm sure it is. I'm confident that the council that covers the Prime Minister's constituency will get its bailout. But, Mr. Mayor, what Labour are doing is not scaremongering. If residents are scared by what the council's financial position, they only need to look at the people who are running this council to see what caused it. For a cumulative deficit to grow as large as £38 million is astounding. If you look at the councils that received money from the government last year under this scheme, their deficits were significantly smaller than Hillingdon's. Why has this council let the deficit get so high before they decided to do something about it? The Conservatives like to compare Hillingdon to neighbouring boroughs, so let's do that now, shall we? Ealing's deficit, 6 million, Harrow's, 5 million, Hounslow's, 6 million. Other councils seem to be getting their deficits under control. Hillingdon waited until a staggering £38 million was projected before they bothered to do anything about it. That is not the behaviour of an administration that practices sound financial management, and it is an insult to residents to argue that it is. Mr. Mayor, this will be my last speech in this council chamber. Mr. Mayor, they laugh, but it's probably going to be some of theirs too. I would like to finish on a more positive note. Every single person in this chamber is here today because they care about their communities, about the safety and well-being of others. We will fight and argue in this chamber, that is in the pursuit of ensuring that our residents get the very best. I've had a marvellous time these past 4 years. I've made wonderful friends and I've learnt a lot from people on both sides of the chamber.
Budgets are not the end-all of what councillors do. They are a footnote on the pages of how we change people's lives for the better. Mr Mayor, for the very last time, thank you.
So, Mr Mayor, just checking, we don't have any other speakers indicated. There's Councillor Edwards, who seconded and reserved his right, and Councillor Goddard, who has a right of reply, but we don't go to them until we're sure there are no other speakers. And can I remind members, Councillor Edwards has got unlimited speaking time as the seconder of the motion.
Councillor Edwards.
Yes, thank you very much, and it won't be 45 minutes. Mr Mayor, the purpose of this Conservative administration is to help make the lives of our residents better. And we do this by continually putting residents first. This is clear in our budget presented tonight. We have put residents first in our consideration of the cost of living squeeze. We recognise the financial pressures facing residents and the disproportionate impact that this will have on low and fixed income households. But unlike our Labour budget, we also recognise that many residents are able to afford an increase in council tax and accept the need for council tax to rise in this inflationary period. Our budget strikes the appropriate balance by helping the former without undermining the sustainability of the council. We have cut by half the increase in core council tax proposed in December. Our increase of 1.9%, together with the rebate funded by the government, means that residents in Band A to D will pay less council tax next year than they do now, and noticeably less than in our neighbouring boroughs. But council tax is only part of the story. Councils also raise income from fees and charges, which we recognise also need to be increased in line with inflation. Councillor Goddard has set out our approach to setting the fees and charges, and we remain committed to keeping the average fees and charges per household at a lower level in our borough than in our neighbours. This is actually very easily achieved, as Hillingdon has the average fees and charges per household comfortably lowest amongst our neighbours, being only £303 per year, compared to 497 in Harrow, 531 in Hounslow, and 538 in Ealing. And all of our residents will continue to enjoy the discounts and other benefits provided by our Hillingdon First card. Our budget ensures that we will again deliver on our promise to have the lowest council tax and fees and charges amongst our neighbouring London boroughs and the lowest parking charges in West London. Hillingdon, under the Conservatives, really is a remarkably good value borough, saving households many hundreds of pounds every year. We have also put our residents first in our commitment to maintaining our neighbourhoods. The budget shows our continued high level of investment in the resurfacing of our roads and the upgrading of our pavements, prioritising those that link communities with shopping, leisure and transport hubs. It's very noticeable when you leave our borough how the standards of highways drops. Neither our Labour opposition nor our neighbouring Labour boroughs have the capacity or the will to commit to maintain safe roads and safe walking. We will continue with our programme of town centre and shopping parade improvement and our very successful programme, Chrysalis programme, which the opposition, as we have heard, would cut. That programme gives residents the power to propose improvements directly in their own neighbourhoods. The budget provides the means for us to maintain the high quality of our parks and green spaces and the resources to ensure that we maintain the high standard of our play areas and outdoor gyms. Our no wheelie bin, free weekly refuse, recycling, food and garden waste collection is guaranteed under the Conservatives, and our budget enables the extension of food waste collection to more flatted developments. On the showing of the Labour amendment tonight, if they were ever to be in power, it would not be long before, to help balance the books, they were forced to follow the lead of their Labour colleagues in neighbouring boroughs and do away with this valued free weekly service. The budget shows our commitment to keeping our streets and neighbourhoods safe. We know that good street lighting is important, and so we are providing nearly £4.75 million to replace and upgrade lighting columns, prioritising those locations advised to us by police. Additionally, we are investing a further £683,000 in our already extensive CCTV network, with more than 1,500 cameras linked into our 24-hour control room, monitoring our public spaces and buildings. New cameras with enhanced capabilities are a game changer in keeping our neighbourhoods safe and fighting crime. They have provided valuable and compelling evidence to police in recent serious crimes, resulting in more focused investigations and speedier arrests and convictions. We have put residents first by providing the funding to maintain and invest in top-class facilities. Most noticeably of these are the new West Drayton Leisure Centre, which will set a new benchmark for the borough, with climbing wall, soft play area, rooftop pitch, along with the usual gym, pool and exercise studios. Cranford Park, where we are investing in bringing back to life the historic buildings, the 17th century vaulted brick cellars, walls, courtyard, to create a destination venue with an event area, cafe, visitor centre and playground and park improvements. And a new waters activities centre, expected to be sited on a lake to the north of the former Hoack Lake, now taken over by High Speed 2 to build the viaduct. The buildings are at a design stage and will provide for the relocation of Hoack as well as local sailing and rowing clubs. With an allocated budget of £25.7 million, this activities centre will become a beacon of excellence and the envy of others. We are putting residents first by ensuring the continued support of those in need. There will be no cuts in social care budgets or other support services, but there is again a need to levy the 1% social care precept. Our budget includes £10.7 million to adapt residents' homes to help them live independently for longer, and funding to maintain our discounts for older people. We will be taking a fresh look at housing for older people to provide the homes that they want to live in later life, in the settings that make them feel safe and supported. We shall be investing a further £19 million to improving existing school places, and in the region of £50 million to provide a further 920 places in the borough for pupils with special education needs. We are committed to help more residents access affordable housing by using the investment powers within the housing revenue account to increase our stock of council house, genuinely affordable homes, by at least 100 new properties per year for the next 5 years. By funding a rolling programme of council home renewal, commencing with the Hayes Regeneration Scheme, and by improving the existing council standards of the council homes through home insulation and energy efficiency measures, so that tenants save on energy bills as well as benefiting the environment. We are putting our residents first in our climate commitment to reduce Hillingdon's emissions and achieve our climate change pledge. We will use the dedicated budget of £25 million over 5 years to increase the number of electric vehicle charging points across the borough, ensuring that all our car parks have the latest fast charge equipment, and the cost of recharging will be determined by the council and not by private profit-making companies. We will improve the energy efficiency of our council buildings and the civic centre in particular. We will set up solar farms to offset the climate impact and cost of energy consumed in the delivery of council services. And of course, we will be planting more trees and improving the biodiversity of the borough. And we are putting residents first by ensuring the continued sound financial management of the council. As Councillor Goddard described, the next period is one of monetary and fiscal tightening, rising interest rates adding to our cost of financing and staff costs, and general inflation running ahead of initial forecasts and for longer than initially budgeted for. We are having to contend with the COVID legacy that has resulted in the higher service demands and lower receipts, and we expect this to continue next year and maybe beyond. And on top of these, the shocking news this morning of the further deterioration in the international picture will result in further economic dislocation, the effects of which we will need to manage. Now is clearly not the time to run down balances, reduce contingencies, or earmark reserves. If anything, we should be rebuilding them to provide the means to meet the uncertainties ahead without having to cut expenditure or penalise our residents with maximum council tax increases. A balanced budget for 22-23 without call-on reserves is, in our view, essential. To achieve this, we will be keeping up our relentless pressure to deliver savings, and we're committed to reducing the cost of senior management by 10%, or £1 million per annum. We will be going faster and further on our transformation programme, by better using technology to automate processes. As I was saying, Mr. Mayor, we will be going faster and further on our transformation programme by better using technology to automate processes and to improve our contact and engagement with residents. We will be going, and we will find new ways of delivering better services to our residents, as we have done with our Stronger Families Hub. Our investment in the Civic Centre, which Labour would slash, is part of our strategy to achieve savings. The £35 million that we will be allocating is not a number plucked out of the air, but is informed by professional surveys and feasibility studies. As a listed building, the scope for change is limited, but the Civic Centre is hugely inefficient, not only in its energy use, but also its use of space. Our investment will secure energy cost savings in the future, but their quantum and timing is too uncertain to responsibly build into this year's budget. More services will be brought back into the Civic Centre, releasing other council buildings for alternative use, commercialisation or disposal. Excess office space can and is being let out at a commercial rate. Labour's cut to the funding of the Civic Centre would undermine all of this and deny savings and income in the future. Mr. Mayor, unlike Labour, our budget includes realistic and achievable savings targets over the 4-year period, which residents should have complete confidence that we shall deliver. Our budget is bold, but balanced. It puts residents first. It ensures the financial sustainability of the council, and it keeps our promise of having council tax and fees and charges comfortably below those of our neighbouring boroughs. Our budget delivers an ambitious programme of investment, both in services and facilities, and an equally ambitious programme of council transformation and modernisation that will secure significant savings in the medium and long term. In May, residents will have a choice, made clearer by the budget debate tonight: continued high levels of service and excellent facilities with sound financial management under the Conservatives, or the certain run on reserves followed by cuts and closures under Labour. I congratulate Councillor Goddard and the officer team in the construct of this excellent budget, which I wholeheartedly support and commend to this chamber.
Councillor Goddard. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have nothing further to add. So we go to the vote.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Unfortunately, I do. So I will ask all members in turn if they are voting for the budget recommendations 1 to 15, as shown on pages 2 to 5 of the order of business, against those recommendations, or abstaining. Councillor Ahmad Wulana.
For the motion.
Councillor Allen. Councillor Arnold. Councillor Barnes. Councillor Bianco. Councillor Birra. Councillor Bliss. Councillor Bridges. Councillor Brightman. Councillor Burrows. Councillor Chubadar.
For.
Councillor Cooper. Councillor Corthorne. Councillor Curling. Councillor Dennis. Councillor DeVille. Councillor Dott. Councillor Duncan.
For.
Councillor Edwards. Councillor Eginton.
For.
Councillor Farley. Councillor Flynn. Councillor Gardner. Councillor Goddard. Councillor Hensley. Councillor Higgins. Councillor Horangi. Councillor Kaufman. Councillor Lavery. Councillor Lewis. Councillor Makwana. Councillor Markham. Councillor Mathers. Councillor Melvin. Councillor Milani. Councillor D. Mills. Councillor R. Mills. Councillor Money. Councillor Morgan. Councillor Nelson. Councillor O'Brien. Councillor Oswell. Councillor Palmer. Councillor Prince. Councillor Sir Ray Puddifoot. Councillor Riley. Councillor Rodrigues. Councillor Simmonds. Councillor Singh. Councillor Sullivan. Councillor Sweeting. Councillor Tuckwell. Councillor Yarrow. Madam Deputy Mayor. Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, the budget recommendations are carried unanimously.
Thank you for that. I mean, just the final words, I mean, despite the difference of opinions, you know, I always welcome debate because I firmly believe a good opposition keeps a good administration on their toes. And it was good debate, and we had a vocal public gallery as well. So we had everything today. So it's getting late in the day now. I formally close the meeting.